What we are witnessing right now is bigger than a trend, bigger than technology, and bigger than any single company. We are living through a structural shift in how trust, access, and opportunity are distributed across the global economy. For decades, industries operated like gated communities. A small number of institutions controlled information, pricing, access, and opportunity. If you wanted to participate, you had to go through them. But today, that model is breaking apart. Consumers now have direct access to information, marketplaces, tools, and global networks that used to be locked behind institutional walls. The result is a massive decentralization of power. This presentation is about understanding that shift. More importantly, it is about understanding what happens when consumers no longer ask for permission to participate. This is Steve Koleno, and this is Confidential Remarks. For a long time, dominant industries did not maintain power simply because they were better. Many stayed dominant because they controlled the system itself. Think about it like a maze. The more confusing the system became, the more dependent people became on the gatekeepers managing it. Complexity created profit. If pricing was hard to understand, institutions gained leverage. If the process was slow or frustrating, consumers had fewer alternatives. And if access was limited, companies could charge a premium just for getting through the door. This is what economists call rent-seeking behavior. That means extracting value without necessarily creating better outcomes for people. The real advantage was never just the product. The advantage was controlling the entrance to the marketplace. But once technology opens the gate, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. Most closed systems rely on 4 core strategies to stay powerful. The first is information asymmetry. That simply means one side knows much more than the other side. If companies know the real pricing, risks, or alternatives while consumers do not, the company holds the advantage. The second is artificial scarcity. Sometimes access is intentionally limited, not because resources are rare, but because exclusivity increases profits. The third is friction as a feature. In other words, systems are made harder than they need to be. Long forms, confusing contracts, waiting periods, hidden fees, all of these create exhaustion. And exhausted people stop searching for alternatives. And finally, institutional protection. Large systems often build legal, financial, or operational barriers that make outside competition difficult. But technology changes all 4 pillars at once. When consumers gain access to information, transparency, speed, and direct marketplaces, the old protections begin to collapse. In the past, information itself was a moat. If institutions controlled the data, they controlled the decision-making process. Think about travel 20 years ago. Most people depended on agents or institutions to compare options. Consumers could not easily see pricing, reviews, or alternatives. Today, a teenager with a smartphone can compare thousands of choices in minutes. That changes everything. When information becomes transparent, consumers become more independent. They stop relying on gatekeepers and start making informed decisions for themselves. And once transparency becomes normal, businesses can no longer compete by hiding information. They have to compete on actual value. That is the structural drain happening right now across multiple industries. The old advantage is disappearing because consumers finally have visibility. At the center of disruption is one powerful force: choice. Closed systems survive when consumers have very few options. Open systems thrive when consumers can compare everything instantly. Think about streaming platforms replacing cable television, or ride-sharing apps replacing taxi monopolies. The disruption did not happen because consumers suddenly changed as people. It happened because they finally had visibility and alternatives. When people can compare prices, reviews, speed, quality, and reputation instantly, loyalty changes. Businesses can no longer depend on consumer confusion. They have to earn trust continuously. Transparency becomes the ultimate disruptor. And once consumers experience freedom of choice, they rarely go backward. This shift is not isolated to one sector. It is happening almost everywhere at the same time. Finance is becoming more consumer-controlled. Education is becoming more accessible online. Media distribution no longer requires traditional gatekeepers. Remote work is changing employment structures. Even healthcare and legal services are becoming more digitally accessible. What ties all of these together is a movement from permission-based systems to capability-based systems. In the past, success often depended on proximity, credentials, or institutional approval. Today, capability matters more. If someone can create value, solve problems, build trust, and reach people directly, they can participate in markets that were once completely closed off. That is a historic transformation. For decades, financial systems operated in ways that made consumers highly dependent on institutions. Banking hours were limited. Real estate data was difficult to access. Insurance pricing lacked transparency. Most consumers had very little negotiating power. Now, compare that to today. People can transfer money instantly, compare mortgage rates online, review investment opportunities from their phones, and access financial education globally. The balance of power is shifting. This does not mean institutions disappear entirely. It means consumers gain leverage for the first time at scale. Financial sovereignty means individuals can make informed choices with more visibility, more speed, and more autonomy than ever before. And once people experience that level of control, expectations permanently change. Historically, many wealth-building opportunities were restricted to insiders. You often needed connections, high minimum investments, geographic access, or institutional relationships just to participate. But digital platforms are rewriting that reality. Today, ordinary people can access investing tools, educational resources, financial data, and marketplaces that were once available only to professionals. That does not automatically guarantee success, but it does change access, and access matters. When tools become democratized, opportunity expands beyond traditional social circles and institutional barriers. The important shift here is that capability is beginning to matter more than proximity. That creates a very different future than the one previous generations experienced. One of the biggest changes in the modern economy is that creators no longer need as many gatekeepers. In the past, musicians needed labels. Writers needed publishers. Educators needed institutions. Entrepreneurs needed traditional distribution networks. Now many people can go directly to the audience. A student can upload a course online. An artist can distribute music globally. A creator can build a business from a laptop. The internet dramatically reduced the cost of reaching people. That means the value increasingly comes from competence, creativity, consistency, and trust, not just institutional approval. The gatekeepers did not completely disappear, but their monopoly over access weakened. And that changes who gets to participate in the economy. For decades, creative industries were built around approval systems. Writers submitted manuscripts and waited months for responses. Musicians relied on labels to distribute their work. Filmmakers depended on studio executives for funding and exposure. Today, creators can publish, stream, upload, and distribute directly. That does not mean quality standards disappear. In many ways, competition becomes even more intense because consumers now decide what succeeds in real time. But the power dynamic changes dramatically. Instead of waiting for institutional permission, creators can test ideas directly in the marketplace. The audience becomes the filter. And in open systems, audiences usually reward authenticity, relevance, and value much faster than traditional gatekeeping systems ever could. Some of the most important industries in society are also beginning to change. Healthcare, hiring, legal services, and education have historically been difficult, expensive, and slow for many people to access. But technology is lowering those barriers. Telehealth allows patients to connect remotely. AI-assisted hiring tools can widen opportunities beyond traditional networks. Digital legal platforms simplify documentation and accessibility. What matters here is not just convenience, it is participation. When systems become easier to access, more people can compete, contribute, and improve their quality of life. And when access expands at scale, society itself changes. One of the most important realizations in modern markets is this: many forms of scarcity were not natural. They were engineered, Sometimes systems limited access intentionally because scarcity protected profits. But open systems reveal something powerful. In many cases, abundance already existed. Information existed. Talent existed. Opportunity existed. Consumers simply could not reach it efficiently. Technology acts like a bridge between hidden abundance and public access. That is why open systems feel so disruptive. They expose how much value is trapped behind institutional walls. And once people see what is possible, expectations rise permanently. We are entering what may become the era of consumer sovereignty. That means consumers are no longer passive participants inside systems controlled entirely by institutions. They are becoming active decision makers with more visibility, more leverage, and more options. Transparency is becoming the default expectation. Merit increasingly matters more than proximity. And competition is shifting toward who can create the most value, not who can control the narrowest gate. The important question was never whether markets would eventually open. The real question was how long gatekeepers could hold the door shut. And now, across industry after industry, that door is opening. This has been confidential remarks.